Hey guys, Tammy here. And in this video, I'm going to talk about when your kids want you together. I think this is kind of one of those areas that produce a little bit of guilt for us, at least in the very beginning, especially if you have young ones that are kind of verbalizing that they want their two parents together. I know this can be really heartbreaking. I talk to a lot of clients that are dealing with this with little ones, particularly like 5 and under. I think it's a little bit more common. I think by the time they're teenagers, they've kind of learned to keep it to themselves because their parents don't get along or whatever. But I think in the very beginning, with littles, it's kind of tough when they have that agenda of wanting you together. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit and how you can kind of maybe reframe this in a way that'll really help you deal with some of the guilt around this if you're feeling that in this issue. Before we dive in, let me just remind you, if you like the content, don't forget to hit like on the video and also subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new episodes are released. If you haven't yet subscribed, please make sure you do that. About 70% of you that watch the videos are not subscribed. And so helps me, you subscribe, I do the content. It works both ways. When we have young children and the breakup is fresh, particularly I find is when this is more common, they really do have kind of this, what we call a reunification agenda, where they want the two parents together. And the way that I describe this to people is if you think about it from the kid's perspective, it's like they want all the people they love in one place, right? They don't want to have to go back and forth. And they don't really obviously understand adult relationships. They don't understand toxic relationships, they don't understand any of those adult aspects of the situation that we're trying to deal with. So when our child says something like this and then we feel guilt from it, really, if you think about it in that way, it's really kind of crazy that we would even feel guilt because it's like, well, of course they don't understand all these different things. If it was a perfect world and everything were cooperative and straightforward and simple and all that, you'd probably still be together, right? But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. Your children just don't understand all that yet. They don't have the cognitive development to be able to understand those things. And one of the analogies that I commonly use for people is I say, well, let me think of it this way. And I know some of you probably only have one child that are watching this, but try to imagine having two, if you can, at least two. And let's say I took each of your children and I put them in a house by themselves. And I said, okay, each of your children live in a separate house. However many kids you got, 1, 2, 4, whatever it is, they all live in a separate house. Now, you can see any of those children as much as you want. You can just never see them at the same time. And I say to parents, like, how would you decide how much you're with one child versus the other? I mean, I think logically what most of us would do is we would divide it up equally and say half with each child if you have 2 kids, 33% with each child if you have 3, that kind of thing is I think how most of us would come at it. The point of it is imagine what a struggle that would be as a parent to actually like, okay, I can go be with this child, but I've got to leave this child. It's very painful. And that's essentially what your child is dealing with. Even if the other parent is narcissistic and difficult and, even sometimes abusive, whatever, kids love their parents most of the time. I mean, it takes a whole lot for a kid not to love a parent. When you're dealing with that kind of situation, it's like, of course, the children are going to have pain over the fact that the two of you aren't together. They're having to go back and forth between you. They're having to be in different environments, a lot of times that are managed very, very differently. They miss the other parent when they're away from them. It shouldn't be any shock to us that they're struggling with it. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about when we talk about this is the reason that we have guilt is because we feel like, oh, I feel guilty because my child's unhappy, right? Because they don't have us under the same roof and they want us under the same roof. One of the questions I want to ask you is, do you feel guilty for disciplining your children? Do you feel guilty over that? Well, I think most parents would say no. Okay, well, isn't your child unhappy in that moment that you discipline them? especially if you got a little. I mean, my guess is, yeah. I mean, I have my 3-year-old grandson lives in the house with me right now. And I am telling you, when they give him a timeout, he is not happy. He is crying and yelling and screaming and doing all the things. So do they just go, oh, well, he's unhappy, so we're not going to give him a timeout? No, we don't do that. Why? Because we know that's what's good for him. Okay. So there's a difference between something being pleasant for them and something being good for them. Okay. And that's really the distinction that you want to make, because this situation is obviously unpleasant for them. It's a change. It's different. My parents are in different households. It's unpleasant. But just because it's unpleasant doesn't mean that it isn't good for them. Okay. And I think that we very much get those two things confused, especially when we're talking about feeling guilty in this particular way. It's good for them because, number one, they're not watching us fight with our co-parent all the time anymore, right? Number two, they're not seeing us accept being in this toxic relationship, being treated the way that we're being treated. It's good for them because they get the benefit of seeing two homes, one in which people treat each other well and another one in which it's toxic, right? And just that contrast alone is going to teach them to filter that in their own lives, right? So that's a benefit. That's good for them. I honestly, I'm not a huge advocate of divorce or whatever. Like I know you're not always married to the other person. Sometimes you just had a child with them, but I'm a big proponent of marriage and all those kinds of things. But there are benefits for our kids when we actually kind of muster the strength to leave or to get out of this kind of toxic situation. And if you don't get out of it and you stay in it, then what happened, which is actually kind of what my parents did. And I don't think either one of my parents are narcissistic, but they were definitely high conflict and they stayed in the relationship. And I do think there is codependency. There was codependency there for my parents. But what happened is I learned that that's how relationship is, right? That's how marriage is. So no shocker that I went out and found somebody where I could recreate that level of codependency in myself, because that's what was normal. That's what I lived with all the time. There wasn't anything else to compare it to. There wasn't two different households for me to go between. My parents did divorce, but not till I was 17. So it was a little too late by then. The damage had already been done, so to speak. There's a lot of benefits to your children for the two of you living in separate homes. And again, I just really want you to get that in your head of something being pleasant for them versus good for them, right? Because I think that most of us as a parent can relate to that type of logic, because again, the discipline, or even like how you choose to feed them, what their diet is. I mean, do we just let them eat sugar and candy and whatever they want all the time? No. I mean, why not? That's what's pleasant for them, right? That's what makes them smile and laugh and be happy and enjoy the food, right? But we know that's not good for them, right? It's not healthy. They need to learn to eat a balanced meal. They need to learn to eat protein and vegetables and whatever. And they need to learn how to have those sugars and things in moderation if they're going to have them. Not because that's what's pleasant or that that's what they want, but because that's what we believe is good for them. So you do all kinds of things throughout the day based on the fact that you believe it's good for your children, not because it's pleasant for them and makes them happy. And yet now the fact that they want the two of you in the same household, we're framing it in the context of, I feel guilty. I'm doing something wrong because my children are unhappy. No, you made a choice to do something that's good for them, despite the fact that it's a difficult choice and that this can be a very difficult road. Okay, so you should not be feeling guilty. You should just be giving yourself a little pat on the back that you actually had the courage to stand up and do something that was good for you and your children, even if it isn't pleasant. If you'd like to learn more about how I can support you on this journey, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's information on that page on my different coaching programs. There's also a link where, you can book a time to talk to me if you would like more information on them. And I hope that serves you, and I will see you guys next time.
And we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon, turn us to thousands.